Inspiration Gal here, and we're here with Kenneth Johnson again, and we're talking about his newest book, Mayan Prophecies, The Renewal of the World. Now, when we're speaking about the Mayan Prophecies, and in our last little bit, we kind of ended up talking about how they weren't all necessarily rosy prophecies. But one of the things in your book that you talk about that I found very interesting is that our history books primarily focus on the winners and the losers, the victors and the victims, whereas the Mayan prophecies focus more on earth changes and what's going on with people as a whole, and again with the earth, and how that impacts the outcome of human life.
The Maya had a particular vision of history that we're only beginning to catch up with now. And you're perfectly correct. Our own histories are typically written in terms of the actions of great men. You know, when Napoleon defeated Wellington at Waterloo, how did that change, the power structure of Europe and its politics? Whereas a Mayan prophecy will typically focus, well, it does focus on some of these things. It does focus on political changes, leadership changes, but that's secondary. The Maya were concerned with things like epidemiology. Will there be epidemics during such a time period? What about food resources? What about climate change? And these were many of the issues that they predicted. I find it really interesting that it's really only since the 1960s that some of our historians, and we tend to label them as social historians, have begun to assess these factors in human history. That's why I say that we're only now beginning to catch up with the Maya.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of people that believe that, through his story, so his story,
yes,
it's been much more male-dominated over the last thousands of years, and now the feminine, the divine feminine, the more artsy side of our brain is starting to become more developed,
Okay.
And even if you look from the 60s and forward, the Eastern cultures are starting to become more dominant in even America. So if you look at now, almost everybody has heard of feng shui,
okay,
acupuncture, yoga. But if you look back to the 60s and before, it was almost non-existent in America. And I think that the evolution of understanding these Mayan prophecies is just one more way that the feminine side of each of us and the world is really starting to come back out.
Okay. Despite the fact that we still know too little about Mayan women and their role, we know that some of them did rule important kingdoms in the old days. Perhaps the most famous is a woman called Lady Shok, who was the queen of Yashjilan. The name, by the way, means shark, shark woman. And she's renowned because she commissioned these marvelous sculptures that depict her performing very exotic rituals, and the actual sculptures were so sensitive that they had to take them out of the jungle environment of Yashjilan, where they might easily decay or be damaged, and they've now been moved to the British Museum. And certainly in modern times, in contemporary times, there are special days when women are honored. Just to run through it very quickly, any Kawak Day is a day of the divine feminine, and it's especially important for midwives, female healers. 9 days, days that are numbered 9, are also important for women. And so consequently there are 2 9 days when It's very interesting. On 9 days, or these 2 days at least, 9 Eb and 9 Chuen, the women go out and they perform ritual with their own shamanesses, and it's really funny to see the men sitting at home. It reminds me of that scene in Pleasantville where William Macy is saying, "Honey, where's my dinner?" Because sometimes you will see the guys on these days that are devoted to the feminine. You will see these guys just sitting there for hours and hours, waiting for the neighbor to come over and make their food.
It doesn't matter where you go in the world, does it? Some things are just always the same.
Some things are always the same. Yeah.
So, do you know why 9? I mean, I can kind of interpret maybe why, but do you know why the 9 is more associated with the feminine?
No, no one ever explained it to me, but I do have a guess. Well, actually, there is one common explanation. We spend 9 months in the mother's womb.
And that was going to be my...
That's about as simple as it gets. There are other factors. For example, in some Mayan languages, as in Yucatan, the word for household is the same as the word for mother or woman, which indicates that the Maya may have been matriarchal at one point in time. See, now 9 is, it's also the day of the ancestors. I remember getting up any number of times. I'd walk outside on the front porch and I'd go, "What are all those plumes of smoke coming up from the cemetery?" And I'd go, "Oh, it must be a 9 day. They must be worshiping the ancestors." Because the 9 is also a number of the ancestors, which brings us to the logical conclusion that the women and the ancestors are the same thing.
Right.